Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Catherine McGarry. I'm Mayor of the City of Cambridge and Chair of today's statutory public meeting. We have quite a busy day today with a special council meeting also this evening. But before we launch into this morning's proceedings, I want to again remind everyone to follow public health guidelines, get vaccinated, wear a mask, and remember to physically distance. As we implement the vaccine passport at our city-run facilities, please be patient and kind with our city staff and teams at our rec centers. We're all navigating these changes together. We're all in this together, and we need to remain patient. So thank you to everyone who's doing their part to keep us all safe and our community open. As I mentioned, today's council meeting is to discuss one statutory public meeting under the Ontario Planning Act. We will be taking a 30-minute recess at 12 p.m. today, and I think that we hope to have heard most of our pre-registered delegations, but if not, at that time we will be recessing and returning for the remainder of speakers, including those that may wish to call into our public meeting line. At the conclusion of the statutory public meeting today, Council will take a recess and reconvene at 5 p.m. this evening for a regular special council meeting to consider all other items on the agenda. So let's get into today's proceedings as we have a busy day with a special council meeting this evening. So I'm now going to ask our clerk to complete a roll call of council so that we can confirm everyone's attendance as we're coming to you electronically today. Madam Clerk.
Councillor Adshade.
Present.
Councillor Devine.
Present.
Councillor Mehta has sent his regrets. Councillor Hamilton.
Present.
Councillor Liggett will join us shortly. Councillor Mann.
Present.
Councillor Reid.
Present.
Councillor Wolf.
Present.
Mayor McGarry.
Present.
Thank you.
Can I remind everybody to be on mute if you're not speaking? Thank you. In addition, we're going to take a moment to welcome the staff we have joining us. So joining us electronically today, we have our city manager, David Calder, our deputy city managers, Dave Bush, Hardy Bromberg, Cheryl Zonleiter, and Yogesh Shah, our chief financial officer, Cheryl Ayers, our city solicitor, Lisa Shields. And I'm very excited to welcome as a new member of our team, our chief planner, Lisa Prime. Lisa, will you give a wave? We also have staff from other divisions joining us this evening, and this afternoon and today, but they'll be joining the meeting when their item is up for discussion. Clerking the meeting today, we have our city clerk, Danielle Manton, our deputy clerk, Jennifer Shaw, and Briar Allison and Mallory Greenoff, council committee services coordinators. So thanks today to our technology service staff, Ayesh De Silva, who's assisting us with logistics for today's meeting. We would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather today is the land traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. A reminder now to members of council that the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act requires members of council to declare any direct or indirect pecuniary interest in a matter in relation to a matter under consideration. Are there any declarations now of pecuniary interest? Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I do have a conflict of interest, and I'm declaring a direct pecuniary interest in the agenda item 5.1, Report 21-228 CD, 255 King Street West, Official Plan and Zoning Bylaw Amendment, North Development Corp., in accordance with Section 5 of the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. The nature of my interest is as follows. It is inappropriate for me to be involved in any decision-making process for this proposed development at 255 King Street West, as family members and I have ownership in property at 237 King Street West, which is adjacent to the proposed development. So I send my regrets that I'll be leaving the meeting.
I unmuted and the machine didn't follow suit. Sorry about that. Thank you, Councillor Mann. Your declaration will be noticed in the minutes.
Thank
I
you.
will be seeing if there's any other declarations from members. Seeing no further declarations, we will move forward with our agenda for today. Today, we have one statutory public meeting under the Ontario Planning Act. I will call upon staff to provide an introductory presentation of the beginning of the statutory public meeting. After we've heard from staff, we will hear from the applicant to the property. Afterwards, I will call for our pre-registered delegations and then open the phone lines to any members of our virtual audience who have tuned into our live stream of today's meeting and wish to speak to the item. Members of our virtual audience wishing to speak to the item before us today may contact us by telephone at 519-740-4680, extension 4799. Again, if you want to write this number down, the number is 519-740-4680, extension 4799. City staff are on hand to monitor and receive calls to this number during the course of the statutory public meeting today. This number is also available on our city website, our agenda, and on the live stream of our meeting located on the City of Cambridge YouTube page. Each delegate who participates will be allowed 5 minutes to speak. I remind members of council and the public that there is no debate of the item during the public meeting. I also remind council that this statutory public meeting item will be before council a second time with a recommendation report of today's process. It will be and also today's process for public consultation. Council will consider all oral and written comments prior to making a decision on a planning application. If a member of the public would like to be informed of further reports and or decisions on the matter, we ask that you please email your name and contact information to the planning division. The contact information for the staff member associated with the public meeting will be shared as part of their presentation. So we're excited to be here again with you, Cambridge, for another special council meeting and another public statutory meeting. And again, I remind you again that we're all in this together and we need to continue to do our part. Today's statutory public meeting is agenda item 5.1.21-228 CD 255 King Street West, official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, North Development Corp. We will hear from staff, the applicant, and then move to pre-registered delegations, followed by anyone who wishes to call into this item. To avoid entering into debate before hearing from delegations, I will ask council that we hold off on questions for staff and or the applicant until we hear from all delegations today as part of the public meeting. So we're going to begin today with a presentation from Rachel Green, Senior Planner Development, who will provide an overview of this report. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good morning, everyone, members of council and the public. I'm just waiting, I guess, to see my presentation up on the screen. Okay, I'm here today to provide an overview of the development application for 255 King Street West, file number OR 0721. Next slide, please. The purpose of today's meeting is to formally introduce the application to council and to provide context for the application. Notice was sent out in accordance with the Planning Act, and those interested in receiving future information regarding the application are encouraged to contact me. My email is on the top of the slides moving forward. Next slide, please. So this overviews the planning review process and where we are at today. Today is a formal public meeting to introduce the proposal to council and the public for consideration and receive feedback. An informal virtual meeting was hosted by the applicant last week on September 22nd with the residents of the condominium directly to the north at 237 King Street West. The proponent did make a presentation, and staff and the ward councilor were in attendance to hear comments from the neighbors. After today's meeting, city staff and agencies will continue to review the file and consider any comments from council and the public. Next slide, please. The subject lands are located at the corner of King Street West and Fountain Street North and is approximately 2.4 hectares in size. CP Rail and Riverside Park are located east of the property. P&H Milling is located south of the property on the other side of King Street. And low density residential exists to the west and north, along with an existing 13-story condo building to the north. The property is the former site of the Crest Hotel, but is currently vacant except for an access driveway that is shared with the condominium to the north. The property is designated Preston Town Center core area in the official plan, with a small portion designated as natural open space. That portion that's designated open space is on the east side of the access driveway. The property is zoned C1 RM2, which is a mixed-use zone permitting commercial and multiple residential uses, as well as RM3 multiple residential on the northern portion adjacent to the existing condo, which also permits multiple residential uses. The property, together with the condo at 237 King Street, have an existing site-specific provision in both the official plan and zoning bylaw, which limits the number of dwelling units to 313 units across the two sites. Next slide, please. So the applicant is proposing to develop the subject site with 3 towers connected by a parking podium with some ground floor commercial area. The applicant is proposing a maximum of 600 dwelling units with a maximum FSI or floor space index of 2. Tower A is proposed to be 15 stories with 179 units. This is the northernmost building closest to the existing condo building. The central building is Tower B and is proposed to be 18 stories with 206 units. And closest to King Street is Tower C with 17 stories and 194 units proposed. A total of 690 parking residential spaces are proposed, where 750 would be required. This is a difference of 60 spaces. And the applicant is also proposing no parking minimums for the commercial floor area. The tenure and provision of affordable housing has not yet been identified as part of this application. Next slide, please. So an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment are required to permit the proposed development. The official plan amendment requests a maximum of 600 dwelling units, a maximum FSI of 2, and max building height of 18 stories. The Preston core area currently has a maximum floor space index of 2, a maximum height of 5 stories. However, the current site-specific official plan policy exempts these provisions. So this table outlines the site-specific zoning amendments that are being requested. The current zoning permits 313 units, where 600 are being proposed. The current zoning limits the height of the development within 30 meters of King Street to 5 stories, where 15 to 18 stories are being proposed. The existing site-specific provision permits a 0-meter setback to parking spaces within a parking structure, and this is proposed to be carried forward in the new provisions. And they are proposing a parking reduction from 1.25 residential parking spaces per unit to 1.15 residential parking spaces per unit. Again, resulting in a deficiency of 60 parking spaces, and a request that no parking spaces be required for the commercial portion of the building. This is just for information that currently retail requires 2.5 spaces per 100 square meters. However, the floor area and the commercial uses have not yet been determined. Next slide, please. So here is a site plan outlining the current proposal. The orientation has the north at the right side of the screen, which would be closest to the existing condo building at 237 King Street West. The 3 buildings are connected by a common parking structure. And this site plan shows the current access being retained on King Street and a new access being proposed to Fountain Street North. Next slide, please. This elevation shows looking from the east, and it shows the grade change across the property and the heights of each proposed building. with building C being closest to King Street at 17 stories. Next slide, please. And finally, the concept design from an aerial view, also shown from the eastern perspective. Next slide, please. Considerations in the review of this file include, but are not limited to compatibility with the surrounding existing development, appropriateness of the proposed height and density, transportation and parking considerations, affordable housing, heritage considerations as the property abuts a number of heritage designated and listed properties, urban design, stormwater management, a record of site condition, and comments received from council, the public, and agency circulation. Next slide, please. Staff recommend that the report be received and referred back to staff for a future recommendation report. Next slide. And finally, here is my information again for members of the public who wish to receive future information regarding this application. They can reach me at the following contact info. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And again, a reminder, we'll be holding questions for staff and our applicant until after all of the delegations have spoken today. We're now going to take a moment to bring in Kristen Barrisdale, who is the Senior Planner of the GSP Group, and she will provide a presentation.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. I'm just waiting for our presentation to load. I will try to refrain from any repetition that Rachel did a great job of summarizing the proposed application and proposed development. So.
Yeah, go ahead, Kristen, and just when
Sure.
you're ready to,
Yep.
to switch the slide, the clerk will do that for you.
Absolutely. So as noted, my name is Kristen Barrisdale from GSP Group. We are the agents acting on behalf of the current property owner, which is North Development Corporation. I'm also going to note that Paul Wagle, who is the president of North Development Corporation, is on the presentation and call this morning. He is available to answer any questions that may arise with respect to construction or the building plans for the proposed development. Next slide, please. A brief summary of my presentation outline. I will do a quick overview of the site and its context. As I mentioned, I will keep my summary of the current official plan and zoning brief, as Ms. Green did an excellent job of summarizing what's already applicable to the site. I will do a summary of the proposed development, including a number of different perspectives and shots to give you a bit of context of the site and surrounding uses. A brief summary of the proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment, a summary of the supporting studies and reports that were submitted with the application, and then answer any questions you may have at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So as Rachel had indicated, the site is located on the north side of King Street, east of Fountain Street. You can see from this aerial image the existing Crestview Springs condominium located to the north of the site. And as Ms. Green had touched on, the existing driveway that provides access to 237 King Crestview Springs over 255 is a shared access, and there's rights of access for that proposed development. I will note as part of this slide, it's very easy to see in this slide, the proposed development essentially pertains to everything that is situated west of that existing driveway. Everything that is east of that driveway, there's quite a significant grade change that falls off to the rail line, and there is no development proposed in that area. Next slide, please. This is just a brief summary, giving you a bit of a broader community context. As you can see, the site is located in the middle. The two separate rings that you see are actually indications of LRT proximity or walkability from an LRT perspective and from a major transit station area perspective. The first inner line closest to the site is a 400-meter radius. The second dashed line is the 800-meter radius. You will see with the yellow star is the approximate location that's been identified by the region for the future stage 2 ion expansion as it comes down into Cambridge. And the turquoise dots and line work that you see are existing Grand River Transit routes that service the site. So there are existing routes that come along King Street as well as Fountain Street. The site is proximate to Riverside Park. It is proximate within 800-meter walking distance to some of the existing community and commercial services that exist in downtown Preston, as well as a number of schools and other community uses such as places of worship, etc. Next slide, please. So as Rachel touched upon, the official plan, the site is located within the community core area, Preston Town Center. It is subject to an existing site-specific policy area, which Ms. Green touched on. It is also within, or a portion of the site is within the regulatory storm floodplain. This essentially applies to the portion of the site, the majority of it that is on that east side of the existing driveway. And as Ms. Green touched on, the site is existing zoning is C1 RM1 with site-specific exceptions, again, that were intended to be applied to both the Crestview Springs subdivision, or excuse me, condo, as well as the balance of the undeveloped property. Next slide, please. So this is a image of the proposed development as Ms. Green showed you. Fountain Street to the north side of the property, or the north as you're reading it, I guess the top of the screen. King Street to the left-hand side of the screen. Building A, which is closest to Crestview Springs, is proposed to be 15 stories with 179 units. Building B, which is central to the site, is supposed to be 18 stories with 206 units. And Building C, which is closest to King Street, is proposed at 17 stories with 194 units. As Ms. Green Ms. Green indicated, the site is connected by a structured podium parking facility that connects all three buildings. Because of the grading of the site, the parking facility will be terraced, and each building will have its individual primary access, as you can see indicated by the drop-off zones and driveways. However, the parking will all be connected. You can also see noted on this plan along the bottom hand of the screen, there's a landscape promenade that's denoted. Again, this is to address some of the grading that happens as you shift from Fountain Street towards the existing driveway and towards the rail line. The intention is to have this place be terraced with walkways, sitting areas, viewing areas, and landscape amenities for residents. Next slide, please. Similarly to the graphic that Ms. Green showed, this is an elevation, a proposed elevation of the buildings. So Building A, as you're seeing it on the right-hand side of the screen, that's next to King Street. Building B in the middle I've got this backwards. Building A, as you see it on the right-hand side of the screen, would be next to Crestview. Building B in the middle is the one that's situated the 18 stories, and Building C, which would be next to King Street, is 17 stories. Next slide, please. So as Ms. Green touched on, we had a public meeting or an information meeting last week with the residents of Crestview Springs condominium, and we prepared a number of graphics to kind of start to give some perspective, scaling, and massing to those that attended the meeting. As you can see, the Crestview Springs condominium is noted on the plan off to the right-hand side. King Street is located or labeled along the bottom of the screen. Fountain Street is located near the top. You can see that we've also included the existing residential uses along Fountain Street. Again, just from a massing and scaling perspective, these obviously don't represent the exact building. The Kings Lane, as it's labeled on this graphic, is the existing driveway, still providing access to Crestview Springs, as well as providing access to the future residential development. And as Ms. Green noted, we're proposing to provide a new access labeled as Fountain Lane that would connect to Fountain Street. And it's important to note that this access has been designed to align with the Jacob Street intersection with Fountain Street on the north side of Fountain Street. The numbers that you see here, I'm going to walk through a couple of slides. The numbers 1, 2, 3 in the turquoise area, they're going to correspond with some of the images and views and perspectives that we have to show you. Next slide, please. So image number 1, which is located on the very bottom left-hand side of your screen. This would be a perspective view as if you were coming up King Street. You can see the proposed development up front, and you can see Crestview Springs condominium in the forefront. Perspective number 2 is again as if you were turning onto the site from King Street onto the existing driveway. This gives you a perspective of Building B and Building A as you're coming into the site. On the top left-hand corner, you can also see a slight perspective or images of the existing residential units on Fountain Street. Next slide, please. Perspective number 3 is if you're looking towards King Street. So this is situated just below Building the middle building, which is building B, as if you were looking out towards King Street. So the perspective that you're seeing right now is that pedestrian promenade and in common amenity area that I spoke of, as well as the tower associated with building C, which is closest to King Street. Perspective number 4 is moving up slightly beyond the middle building, looking up towards the building, building A, which is 15 stories. And then you can see at the top right in the beige is the Crestview condominium perspective. Next slide, please. Building number 5. This is the perspective as if you were essentially where the Crestview Springs overflow parking is right now, looking down towards the site, down towards King Street. So the closest building you see is building A, and then you see building B in the middle off in the distance. And view number 6 is a view south from Tower A. So as if you were above Tower A, closest to Fountain Street, again, looking down over the site. So what you see in the distance is the tower closest to King Street. You can see off to the left-hand side slightly the middle tower, and as well in this perspective, you can see the existing residential uses on Fountain Street, as well as Fountain Lane that's proposed out to Fountain Street. Next slide, please. Slide number 7, or perspective number 7, is if you were beyond Crestview Springs. Again, you can see that on the left-hand side. That is essentially a replica of the massing and scaling of existing Crestview building, as if you were looking down on the proposed development. And this perspective gives you a pretty good representation of the existing grading that affects the site and how the existing grading has been incorporated into the proposed design. Perspective number 8 is if you were standing in the backyard of the rear of the existing residential units on Fountain Street, looking down towards the tower that is adjacent to King Street. Again, in the foreground, you can see 153, 155 Fountain labeled, as well as 163. Again, these perspectives and massings are just conceptual. Obviously, they don't represent the exact building, but you can get a sense here, again, the grading transition that comes down as you move from Fountain Street down towards the site. Next slide, please. And then finally, this is a perspective as if you were standing at the rear yards of 153 and 155 Fountain Street, looking out over the proposed development. The tower that you see in the center of the screen is the middle tower, the 18-story tower, Tower B. This also includes representation of some of the existing vegetation, as well as proposed landscaping and enhanced screening that will be used along this property line. Next slide, please. So again, I'm just finishing off. Again, this is the proposed development. The tower that you see closest to King Street is the 17-story tower. The tower that you see in the middle is the 18-story tower. Unfortunately, it's hard or difficult to see, but the 15-story tower is situated behind that, and then Crestview Springs condominium is situated up to the right-hand top corner. This also gives you an indication of the pedestrian promenade and common space area that is proposed between and amongst the buildings, as well as the surface parking facility. Next slide, please. I won't spend too much time on this. Ms. Green touched on it. We did submit an application requesting to replace Site-Specific Policy 8.10.14 in the OP. And our original request had included provisions that would apply strictly to 255 King Street. As Ms. Green spoke to, there's an existing policy that applies to both 237 King as well as 255 King. We all know that Crestview Springs is built. So we're asking just to modify and have it simply apply to 255 King Street. Increase the maximum FSI and increase the maximum building height to reflect that center building. Next slide. Similarly, we're asking for modify the existing site-specific exception to be applicable to 255 King and bringing forward the similar regulations and permissions as part of the OPA. So a maximum of 600 dwelling units, maximum building height of 18 stories. We are looking for a parking reduction of 1.15 spaces per unit. This is being driven largely by the location and proximity of the site to the future Preston station area. Also, the additional requirement to have no commercial parking uses. The intent is to have very nominal commercial space associated with, so we've asked for there's no additional parking, and that carry forward the requirement to have the parking structure and garage located within the 0 meter setback. Next slide, please. This is a summary of all of the technical reports and studies that were prepared and submitted in support of the application. I'm not going to go through the list here. Most of it's pretty self-explanatory. There's just a couple of things I did want to touch on. There was a slope stability assessment that was done to assess, first and foremost, the existing driveway that provides the connection to 237 King, as well as will provide the connection to 255 King. This is approximately where the site drops off. There's quite a significant grade change and slope there. So we've confirmed that the existing driveway is actually in excellent shape and should have no issues or problems accommodating the proposed development. As was noted by Ms. Green, there are a couple of heritage interested or heritage designated buildings within proximity to the site. So a heritage impact assessment was done. The recommendations of that study indicated that close attention should just be paid to providing compatibility with building materials, scaling and sizing and proximity to those existing uses. Finally, I'll touch on the fact that there was a noise and vibration impact study that was done. It assessed traffic noise as well as the industrial noise associated with P&H Milling Group. This was quite an extensive study that did include sound assessments from each of these sources, and the recommendations have been included in the report. Most of those speak to warning clauses indicating or advising future residents of noise sources, as well as construction considerations with respect to windows and types of materials to be used to mitigate any kind of sound. As Ms. Green touched on, there was an informal meeting that was held on September 22nd with the property owners from Crestview Springs. North Development Corporation has been in contact with all of the residents in the existing residential units along Fountain Street, as well as Crestview, approached them when we made the application and has been providing them information and updates as we continue to work through the application. The meeting on the 22nd was essentially to provide a similar type of summary for residents and answer any questions that they had with regards to the proposed development. Mr. Wago has also secured letters of support from the Preston BIA, as well as a letter from the property owners on 153 to 163 Fountain Street, indicating that they have received the information, that they're grateful that the information is being shared, that principally they don't have objections to development on the site, but would like to continue to have discussions with us regarding massing scale and building height. And that's it for my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Kristen, but we will be holding questions until we hear from the delegations, but thanks for a very thorough and quick assessment. So we will now hear from our pre-registered delegations to Statutory Public Meeting Report 21-228 CD 255 King Street West, Official Plan and Zoning Bylaw Amendment, North Development Corp. I do want to remind the public that should you wish to call in to speak to this item, call in at phone number 519-740-4680, extension 4799. Staff are on standby to receive your call. In the meantime, we do have four pre-registered delegations for this public meeting. So we'll start with our first delegation, and I see that Mark Brown has already joined us. Mark, it's Mayor Catherine McGarry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
That's great. Just give me a minute and let me remind you that you'll have 5 minutes to address council. Please ensure that your remarks relate directly to the agenda item that you're speaking to, that your remarks are respectful, and that you refrain from asking questions of council. So Mark, I'll let you know when your 5 minutes is up, but you will hear a bell at the 1 minute mark, and that's just as a reminder to you. So
Okay.
welcome, thanks for joining us. You now have 5 minutes to speak to this item. Please go ahead.
Yes, dear councillors, my name is Mark Brown. I live at 169 Fountain Street North. My property abuts the proposed development along the north and east property lines, some 60 feet from a proposed 15-story north tower and 4 feet from a proposed concrete parking lot ramp. I am not anti-development. I fully support responsible development, having worked over 40 years in the site development and land development industry in Waterloo region. I thank the developer's agent for reaching out to the residents of Fountain Street in an effort to resolve as many issues as possible prior to this meeting. I trust they are sincere in their intentions and look forward to continuing dialogue beyond this meeting. I will present my overall concerns and then finish with what I consider to be my main objection: the location of the North Tower and associated parking lot ramp. Number one, I understand the zoning on this property is fairly old. However, the proposed unit count is over 3 times the current zoning. These aggressive numbers seem to be driven by maximizing the parking lot structure, such that it violates the current setbacks to be only 4 feet from my rear property corner. I had concerns for several large trees near my lot line. However, with the massive parking structure chopping off roots and the proposed grading filling over the roots, it's unlikely that any arborist would recommend saving them. The developer's agent has committed to planting trees that would provide a visual barrier between the properties along Fountain Street and the parking lot structure. But it would be better if the setbacks were maintained because 4 feet doesn't leave much room for trees to provide a visual barrier. The traffic concerns in this area are already bad. Add another 700 cars and it will likely get much worse. Could right in and right out movements to and from the proposed development be seriously considered, if only from 3 till 6, Monday to Friday? Not much is presented on the proposed access onto Fountain Street in this submission. I suspect there is deficient stopping site distance to support such an access from the proposed development, and perhaps it should be strictly for emergency vehicles. Being a regional road, I asked the region to study the stopping site distance issue. Now, my main objection is the orientation of the North Tower. I believe it would be much better suited in the same orientation as the middle tower along the current and proposed access road. It would be farther from my rear lot line, but also give better views of the Speed River and Riverside Park for more units. With the rotating of the North Tower, it should be possible to relocate the proposed parking lot ramp, so I don't have cars driving 4 feet from my rear yard to exit and enter the parking area. As noted earlier, the proposed tower is approximately 60 feet from my rear lot line. Using the common practice of angular plane design for proper fit and transition of tall buildings, the North Tower should only be about 6 floors high. I wouldn't have an objection to the number of floors of the North Tower if it were rotated 90 degrees and placed along the access road. Of course, that would be subject to an updated shadow and sky view analysis and application of angular plane and building massing design criteria. I've included excerpts from the City of Toronto's design guidelines for tall buildings, and I won't read them all, but essentially, tall buildings should respect the scale of the local context and display an appropriate transition in height and intensity, especially when adjacent to areas of differing land use, lower scale built form, and heritage properties. There's a couple of figures, figure 4 particularly, with the pink building being proposed new buildings, and it gives an illustration of the angular plane concept with the existing buildings in purple. I recognize that the subject lands are in the downtown core. However, part of proper core planning is to ensure that suitable transition to surrounding land uses occurs. In closing, I ask that the developer, the city, and the region incorporate these common design practices into the final design. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. With a few seconds to go, if you'll just stay on the line, I'm just going to turn to members of council to see if they have any questions of clarification of you.
Okay.
Seeing none, I want to thank you for your delegation and this morning and taking the time to be with us. If you wish to continue watching, especially this item, you can follow along on the City of Cambridge YouTube channel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Our next delegation is Jane Newland. So we're just going to bring her into the meeting.
Thank you.
Jane, it's Mayor McGarry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Just a reminder that you have 5 minutes to address council, and please ensure that your remarks relate directly to the agenda item that you're speaking to, that your remarks are respectful, and that you refrain from asking questions of council. So I'll let you know when your 5 minutes are up. You will hear a bell at the 1 minute mark, so that'll be a good reminder for you. And if you would just stay afterwards in case any member of council has questions for you, that would be helpful. Thank you, Jane. Please begin.
Thank you, Member Gary, members of council. I was rather assuming that I had a little longer in that I am speaking for a community group. So my name is Jane Newland. I live on Fountain Street South. I am speaking today on behalf of residents on Fountain Street South, also Parkview Crescent and Preston Heights Community Housing Cooperative. There are over 35 residents in our community group. I bring our community concerns to you today regarding the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendment to redevelop the property at 255 King Street West. Our principal concerns are as follows. 1, the scale and density of the proposal and how this relates to the established community of Fountain Street North. 2, the safety risk, the traffic egress at the planned new driveway connection at Fountain Street and Jacob Street. And 3, environmental concerns, including water issues, slope stability and wind. To my first point, this is overzealous intensification to the extreme. 3 tower blocks, 18, 17 and 15 stories with 600 dwelling units, 690 parking spaces, far beyond the current zoning regulations. This application is particularly intrusive to the existing neighbourhoods of Fountain Street North, especially given the many designated and listed dwellings on Fountain Street North and the 1875 herb house on the corner of Jacob Street. I remind Council that Section 2.6.1.8 of the official plan states that, I quote, infill, intensification and redevelopment within existing neighbourhoods will be minor in nature and will be designed to respect existing character. This is clearly not the case here. And in fact, this development falls within the Preston core boundary, which has a 5-storey height limit. These massive blocks will literally overshadow, engulf, now having seen the drawings, existing dwellings in the area, far exceeding, as the many technical reports state, the height of existing buildings and homes in the area. If this development goes ahead in its proposed form, these eyesores will become the new landmarks of Preston, replacing the fast disappearing heritage in this area. To my second point, the development speaks of creating a new driveway exiting onto Fountain Street opposite the quiet residential road of Jacob Street. This egress point is also just below the crest of a hill. This will lead to problems of visibility and preventable accidents. Any local resident who has driven up Fountain Street North at peak times or in poor visibility or in snow understands how dangerous this hill already is, without adding additional vehicles turning onto it. A key strand of this city's official plan is to create healthy, livable communities that are, I quote, safe, accessible, aesthetically pleasing, well-serviced and inclusive developments. The plan also states that the development should be transit-oriented, providing the provision of safe environment for pedestrians and encouragement of pedestrian activity. Adding an additional junction here to accommodate almost 700 vehicles from this development will exacerbate existing traffic flow and will pose risk to pedestrians and local residents who use the sidewalks around it. For my third point, we consider there to be a number of environmental concerns associated with this project, including water, bedrock issues and slope stability. As residents of Fountain Street South, we understand that water is an ongoing challenge on this street. Fountain Street was given its name for a reason, and the name applies to both north and south parts of the street alike. Indeed, the development is on the site of the former Cress Hotel, which was renowned for its reformative springs. As a community, we wonder if the presence of the naturally occurring springs has been adequately addressed in the environmental reports. What is more, the slope stability report clearly notes that there is a risk to adjacent properties, like those listed on the Heritage Register. I quote, during construction, it is anticipated that the shoring up of the excavation side slope will be required to maintain the integrity and stability of the existing slope adjacent to the rear property lines of 153, 155 and 169 Fountain Street North. The owners of these residences clearly risk problems of substantial subsidence. Given that these proposed buildings are substantially taller than their surroundings, wind is also a risk factor. And indeed, the pedestrian wind assessment states that, I quote, winds at the northwest and southwest corners of the building B could potentially exceed the safety criterion in the winter due to corner accelerations. In conclusion, then, I would like to reiterate that our community of Fountain Street South stands in solidarity with our neighbours on Fountain Street North with regard to this planning application. We consider it to be yet another example of unsympathetic and overzealous intensification happening in Cambridge. We respectfully request, then, that the Council consider Section 2.2 of the official plan when reviewing this application.
Thank you very much, Jane. I did give you a few extra moments there for time.
I was under the impression that I had a full 15 minutes as I was representing a community group. So I apologise for the absolutely rapid delivery of my presentation.
That's all right. And you can always send it in a written format, but my clerks have indicated the 5 minutes. I'm just going to turn to members of council now to see if they have any questions of clarification for you. And seeing none, thank you for your time. If you wish to continue watching, you can do so on the City of Cambridge YouTube page. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Our next delegation is Karen Scott Booth.
Send it in a written format, but my clerks have indicated.
Good morning, Karen.
5 minutes. I'm just going to turn to members of council.
Karen, it's Mary. Hi, you've turned that off? Good morning.
I did. Good morning.
Thanks very much. Thank you for joining us. And just a reminder, Karen, I understand that you've asked for and received permission for 15 minutes to speak, and ensure that your remarks relate directly to the agenda item that you're speaking to, that your remarks are respectful, and that you refrain from asking questions of council. So as same as always, if members of council have questions of clarity for you after your address, I'll ask you just to hang on the line once you're finished, Karen.
Okay, thank you.
So good morning. Please begin.
Just to apologize ahead of time, I am at work, and so if you hear bells or noise, I apologize. I can't control that. I do have a presentation submitted by the ACO, and I'm not sure if that's up yet.
We have not received it, Karen.
Oh, well, wonderful. Okay. To my knowledge, it was yesterday, so I will just work from.
No one has it.
Okay, I'll begin without it. So, Mayor McGarry, members of council, staff, and community, my name is Karen Scott Booth. I'm the Vice President of ACO Cambridge and North Dumfries, and I'm here to delegate on behalf of the ACO about 255 King Street West development application. This proposal identifies that there will be 3 high-rise buildings built within an area that has been identified for 176 residential units, and the proposal, the application, is asking for 3 times the current zoning allowed. Also asking for official plan amendments that would reduce setbacks and scale. Our concern with the ACO's concern, as you know, we advocate for the best preservation and protection of our cultural heritage resources. So we're looking at the numerous heritage designated and listed properties that will be impacted. In fact, there are 7 properties adjacent or in proximity to this development. And that doesn't include properties in the area like the mill pond, the dam, and the park. The properties that are immediately impacted, and Mark spoke very eloquently about his property, which will probably be the greatest impact, is a listed property at, I think it's 163 Fountain Street. 155 Fountain Street is designated, and even though there are a number of properties that are not adjacent, there are properties that will be impacted through views and vistas. As you know, this is one of the older residential neighborhoods of Preston, if not the oldest. And from the Heritage Master Plan, it identifies this area has ties to the original Preston. It actually was a route through to Kitchener-Waterloo. Its houses are built on lands formerly associated with the founder of Preston, John Erb. And the unique stone house at 127 Jacob Street was built in 1845 by his son. The hillside location also sets this neighborhood apart from otherwise level terrain common elsewhere in Preston. This is a very exceptional area and has been ravaged by development very recently, as you know. Existing actually on the site, although the HIA fails to identify the remaining built features, are a number of remaining built features from the Crest Hotel. They include foundations with tiled or terrazzo floors, stone retaining walls, staircases, and I did note that the HIA notes the lamp standards but doesn't really talk about them. And to the best of our knowledge, there has been no archaeological study undertaken as well. There would obviously have concern for pre-colonial and colonial settlement remnants. Other issues with the HIA. On page 11 of the Heritage Impact Assessment, it identifies the designating bylaw for 155 Fountain Street, which is directly impacted. It identifies the relationship of this site to the Speed River Valley, which will be altered dramatically by this proposal. The HIA also states there are no negative impacts to the adjacent heritage, and we would argue that there are numerous impacts. Changes in slope and topography, vibrations during construction, and we would have our greatest concern for the stone property that Mark owns, as he will be impacted on two sides. The shadow study that indicates that shadows will be going along across Fountain Street and up the other side on the properties as well on the other side of Fountain Street that have not been included in the study. The towers will block historic views and vistas both to and from this area. We also have concern for the lack of appropriate setbacks and buffers. Section 4.2, priorities for cultural heritage resources, identify that when a development is proposed, the city will encourage the conservation of cultural heritage resources in the following order of preference. Incorporate the cultural heritage resources as their surrounding context into the development application in a manner which does not conflict with the cultural heritage resource. This is of great concern as this development, as many others in the city, does not respond to the cultural heritage resources or the context of the area. The scale and massing of this development is overzealous. This is an area that has been zoned for, as I mentioned, 176, and the actual overzealous intention of 550 units increases the need to cover the natural lands with hardscaping. It also increases the need for parking, and it increases the height. All of these things are within a norm. You could actually develop this site with a much more sympathetic scale and massing if the density were not so great. The natural landscape is also of great concern. In section 2.4.2 of the official plan, it identifies this area as a significant valley and in the flood fringe. The proposed development results in a significant loss in naturalized vegetation, changes to the slope and the river valley, issues with the natural sulfur springs that exist, and obstruction of the heritage views and vistas from, as I mentioned, from Fountain Street North towards the Preston core. Habitat loss is also an issue that doesn't necessarily come under our mandate, but we would also like to identify that there are a significant number of wildlife living in the area, and this development will remove all their habitat. Additional concerns within the official plan, it states that infill, intensification, and redevelopment within existing neighborhoods, of which this is, will be minor in nature and will be designed to respect the existing character. This development does not respond to that official plan at all. And I haven't been, because I'm at work, I wasn't able to listen to the presentations of the planner and the developer, but in closing, ACO have consulted with expert opinion on this submission, and we have been advised of the following. And if I'm incorrect now, after not watching the submissions, I apologize, but this is the opinion of our expert prior to the delegations today from the submission online. And the submissions for 255 King Street do not provide the basic information needed to evaluate this proposal. There needs to be a site plan with context. Since the terrain is not flat, cross sections through the site, particularly on the uphill side, are essential. We need context with a plan and grade. Any commercial or public sense of place that the official plan designation of a town center connotes, or any connection to the historical neighborhood context, has been totally lost. Expert opinion suggests that the legal requirements for a public meeting have not been met, and at minimum, required drawing material to describe what is proposed has not been submitted. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Karen. I'm just going to turn to members of council now to see if they have any questions of clarity for you. And I see none. Thank you very much for joining us today. And as usual, if you want to continue watching, you can follow along the City of Cambridge YouTube page. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Our next delegation is Michelle Goodrich. Michelle, it's Mayor McGarry. Can you hear me?
Good morning, Mayor McGarry. Yes, I can.
Thank you. Just give me a moment. Just a reminder that you'll have 5 minutes to address council, and please ensure that your remarks relate directly to the agenda item that you're speaking to, and that your remarks remain respectful, and that you refrain from asking questions of council. I'll let you know when the 5 minutes is up, but you will hear a bell at the 1 minute mark just to remind you where you are. And if you would just stay on the line afterwards, Michelle, in case there's any questions of clarity from members of council. So good morning, and please begin.
Good morning, Mayor McGarry, members of council, and the public. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. I tend to speak to you a lot, but this one is especially important as my home is at 155 Fountain Street North, and this development will impact me directly. I would first like to go on record to commend Paul Weigel and North for approaching the neighbors early on. We've had several in-person on-site meetings with him directly, and this has been an opportunity for the neighbors to voice their concerns. Initial conversations, of course, involved scale and massing, suitability for the area, the 0 meter setback for the parking garage from both my neighbors Mark and my neighbor Adam on the outsides of the sort of cluster of houses that this property surrounds. So as you saw in that presentation, it's almost like a U-shaped lot that these 4 listed or designated structures sit in between. So while I commend Paul for his wonderful work with us, and we have begun negotiations and consultations to find amenable action so that the development is less impactful. After watching today's presentation, I must admit I'm a bit taken aback. We have been asking for scale and mass drawings from the view of our home for over a month. We received a few in the last week, some of which you saw, but today I also saw some brand new ones. And the one in particular that really upset me, I suppose, is the one that showed just how close this building really is going to become and how dwarfed our houses are going to look. Paul has made some promises and some concessions to try to make this a little bit more appetizing to the neighbors, and we support continued discussion on this. But after seeing these new scale and massing drawings, I am quite alarmed. So I would like to see continued feedback. I'm curious to see what staff's direction is after this goes through the public information session. I'm curious to see what the region's comments are and how we move forward. I hope that there are changes to what is presented before you today, and that we can find a middle ground so that the development can go through, as I am sure that some sort of development will happen on this property. But I also want to see that our neighbors are as happy as possible, and that we are not as directly impacted. We are not in a fishbowl. We are not, looking at shadows and buildings all day. So we do have some very real concerns. But I wanted to come on today and let you know that we have been talking to Paul, and that has been great. But we would like to see how this development plans out, and I'm hopeful that there are some change between what is presented to you today and what ends up happening in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm just going to turn now to members of council to see if there's any questions of clarification for you. There's your 1 minute bell. I don't see any. Thank you very much for spending the time with us today. And if you wish to continue watching, as usual, you can follow along on the City of Cambridge YouTube page. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
There are no further pre-registered delegations for this public meeting, so I'm now going to open the floor and call for any additional members of the public who would like to call in and speak to the Public Meeting Report 21-228 CD 255 King Street West, Official Plan and Zoning Bylaw Amendment, North Development Corp. And again, individuals wishing to speak to this item can contact us by phone at 519-740-4680, extension 4799. At this time, I'm going to confer with our clerk to determine if any individuals have called in requesting to speak to this item. And so far, no, but after this first call out, we will be having a second call out as well. I'll just wait for a moment to see if we have any callers. Thank you for your patience. We've not received any requests during this first round to speak to this item during our first short break. So we'll now move to a longer break to give anyone watching the opportunity to call in and speak to Public Meeting Report 21-228 CD 255 King Street West, Official Plan and Zoning Amendment Bylaw Amendment, North Development Court. And again, I remind viewers that the phone number to call in is 519-740-4680, extension 4799. So we're going to turn our mics and our cameras off for about 3 minutes and await any other callers at this time. Counselors, can you remember to turn on your camera, please? Thank you for your patience. We do have one member of the public who has called in. So we're going to have Ken Heber brought into the meeting to delegate. Ken, it's Mayor McGarry. Can you hear me?
Yes, apologize. I've got renovations going on in the building here.
That's okay. We can hear that. Just give me a moment to just give you a couple of remarks first. Just a reminder, Ken, that you'll have 5 minutes to address council. Please ensure that your remarks relate directly to the agenda item you're speaking to. Otherwise, we might ask you to end the remarks. We do have rules of engagement in council meetings and ask that you ensure that your remarks remain respectful and that you refrain from asking questions of council. So I'll advise you when your 5 minutes are up. If you're speaking that long, you will hear a bell at the 1 minute mark, just to give you a reminder. And just once you're done, I'm going to ask you to stay on the line in case there's members of council that wish to ask you any questions. Okay, so welcome, Ken, and please begin.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Mayor and Council. My name is Ken Heber. I am a resident at 237 King Street West, Unit 201. I'm also the board president, and we have been in contact with Paul Weigel on 2 occasions. The board has to discuss issues that reflect on Crestview Springs. Parking is an issue. We have an overflow parking under a 1994 agreement that Paul has indicated he will honor that, as well as reconfigure and redevelop that parking area for the exclusive use of the Crestview Springs people. And the shared driveway, that is a concern. The driveway is at its lifespan. We've been maintaining it since 1994 and making patches, repairs as needed along it, as well as the guardrail along the walkway. And he's indicated that that driveway will be redone to accommodate the proposed 700 cars that his development will generate. That's not counting the additional probably around 150 cars that are at Crestview Springs 237 that use that driveway. He's indicated that there will be a second driveway out to Fountain Street, which a 1994 agreement said would have to be done if the property was developed. We appreciate that. And we have very positive meetings with Paul. As I said, we've had 2 meetings with him as a board, and we requested and received a virtual meeting, which took place last week for the benefit of our 137 owners here at Crestview. So our main concern is the parking and the tremendous traffic that this is going to generate. Right now, it is almost impossible to make a left-hand turn onto King Street with the new reconfigured roadway about a year ago. To make a left-hand turn, we have to cross 4 lanes of traffic to even reach the first lane that will proceed towards downtown Preston. Very dangerous. We've had a lot of close calls of our owners being T-boned. Our owners are a mature community, and reaction times aren't as fast. But the added number of cars going out to King Street is going to be very, very dangerous. There will be accidents, and hopefully nobody will be killed. We have talked to Paul, and he's agreed to make the entranceway a little bit more better with a right-hand turn lane, a left turn lane, and an inbound lane. But the traffic at rush hour, especially when Toyota empties coming down Fountain Street onto King, will make it virtually impossible for us to turn left. So I've agreed to work with Paul to address the region, because Fountain Street and King Street are regional roads, and to petition them for some kind of lights, or possibly the roundabout, bring that back, and a light at Fountain Street. As previously noted, that is on an incline, and visibility is an issue, so a light would have to be implemented at that point. Again, I appreciate the time to speak to council, and I wish that, I hope that you'll take this information to heart. And if we reduce the size of the buildings, it reduces the number of cars. So King Street, Eagle Street, the 2 units that are there, they're about 15 stories max. So these units would be higher and out of sorts with the surrounding areas. So thank you very much for your time, and good afternoon.
Thank you, Ken. And I'm just going to have you stay on the line if that's okay, while I just do a quick scan from members of council to see if there's any questions of clarification for you.
Okay.
And seeing none, thank you very much for taking the time. Oh, I'm sorry. I do have one from Councillor Wolf. Councillor Wolf, go ahead.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I was just wondering how many stories your apartment building is.
We are 13 stories. Crestview Springs is 13 stories. It looks higher because we're on a hill.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. So thank you for taking the time to phone in to delegate to this meeting. And you can follow along this item if you'd like to do so on the City of Cambridge YouTube page. Thank you very much, Ken.
Thank you for your time.
There are no further callers at this moment, so we're going to do one more public round of call-in. So we're going to give another 3 minutes for people to call in to speak to public meeting report 21-228 CD 255 King Street West, official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, North Development Corp. And members of the public can call in on the telephone at 519-740-4680, extension 4799. So we'll go off screen for about 3 to 4 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. I've received confirmation from staff that the phone lines and messages for the statutory public meeting call-in extension have all been received. We didn't have any further call-ins in this last round. So we have heard from all those who requested to speak today. So I now deem this public meeting closed. Now, before going to putting the motion on the floor, I will ask council if they have any questions for our staff or our applicant today. And once we're through questions only, we will be placing the motion on the floor and move to debate and comments. But I remind council that today, this item is only before us for receipt. We're to refer this report back to staff so they can move ahead. This item will be before council again with recommendations for staff at a future date. So we'll now go to questions for either the applicant or staff. Councillor Wolf, go ahead. Councillor Wolf.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to, I think, the applicant, but perhaps staff, is any affordable housing planned in this project?
Through you, Madam Chair, we haven't gotten to those semantics yet at this point to determine whether or not it's going to be rental or condo. However, we know that the region has affordability targets that were mentioned as part of pre-consultation, and we're open to continued discussions as to how and how much affordable housing will be provided as part of the future development.
Okay, Councillor Hamilton, followed by Councillor Devine. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I do have a couple of questions, and the first one had to do with, I suppose, Councillor Wolf's comment about affordable housing and the fact this is very close to the LRT, 400 meters, I think, approximately was mentioned. So are there any plans to link up access to the LRT? Will there be sidewalks, trails? If someone's not driving, there were a lot of conversations about parking, but how about trail access, sidewalk access? How is that going to work with these three buildings?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the buildings and the proposed development, I think I noted, included that extensive pedestrian and open space promenade along the frontage. They will be requirements to provide pedestrian connections at multiple locations throughout the site to connect to the existing municipal facilities that are located along King Street as well as Fountain Street as well.
Thank you. And a quick follow-up question, Your Worship.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Has there been any discussion of including, or is there a possibility of including receptacles for bicycles? If there's a reduction in parking, it's good to offset that with spaces for bikes. Is there any way we can include secure bicycle facilities as well?
Through you, Madam Mayor, absolutely. We refer probably to the draft bylaw that the city has prepared with regards to zoning. I think that there are some inclusions and new considerations in there for both secure and unsecure bicycle parking. In a building and a development of this scale, we typically see that type of amenity included for residents. So that would include, bicycle lockers internal to the building, as well as temporary visitor biking parking outside.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Devine, go ahead, Councillor Devine.
Yes, to the chair, and thank you for the presentations. Very well done. Clearly, this is going to be in the future on the path of the LRT route, and there's a station nearby.
Janice Devine.
Excuse me, let me just get rid of this. And there's there's going to be a LRT station nearby, which is great. However, when we talk about parking, we're reducing that building by at least 60 units. And additionally, it would appear there's going to be a commercial on the main floor, yet no parking for commercial. That has me concerned. And the other thing that, the world is changing. In the parking spaces that are there going to be allocations for charging stations for electric vehicles? Because I didn't see any mention of that. That's my concerns. The other concerns were covered up by the counselors.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So first I'll speak to the reduced parking rates. We are proposing a rate of 1.15 spaces per unit, which is generally consistent, I think, with some of the draft regulations as proposed by the City of Cambridge, as well as some of the rates that other local municipalities have implemented in and around the LRT. To encourage LRT ridership, but yes, to obviously ensure that there is sufficient parking that is provided on site for residents. Some other explorations or things that could be considered with regards to parking are shared parking. So typically those who would be visiting the site for the commercial units would be there during the day when you would expect residents will be not parking in the site. That's assuming a non-COVID world, obviously, and that people start to shift back to offices and working spaces. But there could be considerations included or incorporated that would allow for shared parking, perhaps of residential visitor parking, again, that's not typically used during business hours, that is typically used overnight. And then speaking to electrical parking, it's my understanding that the building code, the most recent changes to the building code actually have provisions and requirements to make structured parking accessible or convertible easily to electrical units, meaning that you have to put the adapters behind the wall and the electrical services behind the wall so that it can be easily adapted and converted to electrical parking spaces.
May I respond to that, Mayor McGarry?
Go ahead.
Thank you. We have to get off the illusion that people work 9 to 5. That illusion is long gone. That's out the door. So if we're depending, looking at commercial spaces for people to park when the other people are at work, the world doesn't work like that any longer. So I would suggest we need parking, some parking for these commercial spaces, not zero parking. Thank you.
Councillor Reid is next. Go ahead, Councillor Reid.
Thank you very much. Some of the questions that I have or comments have already been made, but what I would like to say is when I read about Kitchener having a building on Queen Street with no parking, that sparked my interest. And I started to think about this development here, which we of course have been waiting for a very long time. It's in an important part of Preston, and it's going to be a signature buildings as people come into Preston or leave Preston. And I started to think of the proximity that the buildings will be to the LRT. So why don't we reduce the parking even more? And I'm not even going to suggest a number. I think that's something that staff and Paul Weigo can talk about and see, but add the secure bicycle lockers instead of parking, so that we are encouraging people to use transit and encouraging people to use bicycles as a way of travel and getting out of their car. And with doing that, we're also supporting our climate strategies that we have within the city. So I would like the applicants to look at that and to see if that's not a possibility of reducing the parking and adding the secure bicycle lockers instead. That's all for now.
Thank you. Seeing no further hands, I just had a question of clarification, probably from yourself, Rachel, and it's really regarding the station, the proposed station from the LRT. Do these buildings fall within the 800 meters of the major transit station area surrounding the LRT station?
Yes, they are within the regionally endorsed major transit station area.
Thank you. Certainly good for density in order to help support the business case for LRT. Councillor Reid, I see your hand up again. Is that a legacy hand? I think it was. I see no further questions from members of council, so thank you very much. We're now going to call for the motion. The recommendation for consideration is to refer this application back to staff for a subsequent report and recommendation. Councillor Reid, you have the motion.
Would the clerk please read it for me? And I'd like to speak to it.
Yep, go ahead, Madam Clerk.
Moved by Councillor Reid, seconded by Councillor Devine. Recommendation that report 21228 CD Public Meeting Report 255 King Street West Official Plan and Zoning Bylaw Amendment North Development Corp be received, and that the application OR 0721 for 255 King Street West be referred back to staff for a subsequent report and staff recommendation.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm very pleased to see this come forward because this has been an area that has been vacant for, I believe, 30 years. And we've been waiting and waiting for something to happen there because this is a gateway into Preston. And it's really important that we have something that's significant and something that is good and that people would enjoy to be a part of. And so I'm really pleased to see that we are having something there. I'm also looking at it from the aspect of that it is so close to the LRT and regeneration that we really need to push for affordable housing here. This is an ideal place for affordable housing. I'm really wondering, when we're looking at the transit support strategies, there is money for affordable housing. I'm not sure how that is used, but if that could be a part of the strategy in order to get affordable housing there, you know, I think that would be something council might consider. And I really am pleased that we have something coming here that will fill that space. I know that Paul has worked with the neighbors and will continue to work with the neighbors. And I'm hoping that the neighbors will be able to find satisfaction for their concerns, and that we can move forward on this particular development quite quickly. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. So we are going to move forward to see if there's any further questions from members of council at this time before we move on to comments. And seeing no further questions, we will move on to comments. Councillor Adshade, go ahead.
Thanks, Your Worship, and echoing what Councillor Reid said, I think this is exciting for Preston. I think it's been a vacant area of land, I think, over 30 years, so it's good to see some development happening here. One thing I'd like the applicant to take a look at is, I think it was mentioned by some of the delegates, is to move the parking garage from the people on Fountain Street have really raised concerns that the parking garage is too close. So if the applicant could look into that with negotiations between the neighborhood, I think that would be something that would be very beneficial.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. This is indeed a gateway, not only into Preston, but into Cambridge. So I think it's very exciting that after so long, we're seeing some movement towards some development in the area that will also facilitate the longer term goals of the city as a whole, if we factor in things like the LRT. So that, I think, is fantastic. But as several delegations noted, there are, of course, some concerns that we have to take into consideration. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about the environmental report, what exactly this will do to the surrounding landscape, the stability of the buildings, of course. We know that area has, it's pierced by underground waterways. Where, I'm not quite sure. That's not my field of expertise, but I'm looking forward to hearing that in the future. What concerns me is the lack of affordable housing because of the proximity, not only to the LRT, but to our neighbors in Kitchener, the 401, other transit routes. I think it would be an ideal location to look at more affordable housing, especially being on two regional roads. I think it's a win-win for Cambridge, the region of Waterloo, and of course, our residents that need that housing and need access to transportation to get to and from work and play. In terms of parking, I do hear what Councillor Reid says, and I agree that if the conditions are correct, a lack of parking can actually be beneficial and it can facilitate that transition towards more green modes of transportation that we know are sorely needed in the future. But I do also know the area in Waterloo where the building where they plan to have no parking. And it's like, it is right downtown in an urban core. So within a 5-minute walk, you have a mall, a large grocery store, the downtown streets, the LRT, banks, libraries, universities, perimeter is right there, the Bell City School is right there. So in this location, I do think that we should look into whether or not and how we can reduce parking to facilitate modes of active transportation and LRT use. But we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because ultimately being right on the 401 and 2 large regional roads, I think people will still need cars. And to Councillor Devine's point, I'd like to hear more about what type of commercial businesses will go into buildings such as this, and why people wouldn't necessarily need cars to get there, or how we can guarantee people that would need cars would actually have spaces. Because I wouldn't want any business owners to set up shop and then say, no one's coming because no one can park. No one can get here on a Saturday morning because no one's going to work. But overall, factoring in environment, parking, the way that Cambridge is growing, and the proximity of this development to regional roads, the 401, and the gateway to the city, I think ultimately it's very positive, and I look forward to hearing the next stage and step, factoring in concerns of councillors and residents of Cambridge. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wolf, go ahead.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I have many of the same concerns as many of the councillors that have already spoken. I'm very pleased to hear that the developer has worked so well with the residents of the apartment building and also the residents on Fountain Street. And I think the negotiation between the developer and these stakeholders need to continue. I agree with Councillor Adche that the setbacks need to be reconsidered. And again, affordable housing is a priority for the region and for the city. So if we're going to consider the increased density in this site, we also need to seriously consider some affordable housing here. As Councillor Hamilton has said, with the proximity of the LRT station, this is an ideal place for affordable housing. And excuse me, and our rental situation in the city overall is very low. So if at least one of these buildings is a rental building, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to add a few comments myself. And again, I do echo my fellow councillors that feel that it's a great site to redevelop at this particular time. It's been empty for a long time. And the site and the density does satisfy a lot of the other goals that we are looking at for the city of Cambridge, including to ensure that we reduce the overall greenhouse gas emissions, that we move to higher order transit as a better mode of public transportation, and the fact that this site is within 800 meters of the LRT station means it's within the major transit station area, which is identified as a higher area of density in these new policies, provincially as well as through the region. So I'm pleased about that. I do hear some of the residents' concerns as well, and I think they're looking for some mitigation around things like perhaps screening and landscaping to help mitigate some of the issues between the taller buildings and their homes. I'm certainly pleased to see another entrance provided in order to reroute some of the traffic from King Street and onto Fountain Street. And I know that we'll be hearing once staff, if we do pass today's motion, once we hear from staff and a recommendation, there may be some more concessions for the neighbors along in that report as well. Seeing no further comments, I wanted to thank everybody for their comments, and so we're ready for the vote. Madam Clerk?
Councillor Adshade,
In favor.
Councillor Devine,
Aye.
Councillor Hamilton,
In favor.
Councillor Reid,
In favor.
Councillor Wolf,
In favor?
Mayor McGarry.
In favor.
That carries.
Well, thank you. And thanks everyone for being with us today. As we mentioned earlier, and as outlined in our council agenda today, council is now going to recess until 5 p.m. and we will reconvene at 5 p.m. to discuss the rest of our agenda. Thank you, Cambridge. Please stay safe and be kind.